Hi, I'm pharmacist Benjamin Knight Fuchs, registered pharmacist, cosmetic chemist, and nutritionist, and welcome to Skin Matters, the podcast where we clarify the skin, help you understand the skin so you can maximize your skincare products and procedures and make sure you're getting the maximum benefit from what you're doing and what you're putting on your skin. So in our last program, we talked a little bit about the structure of the skin. Actually, we talked about the structure of the surface of the skin. It turns out that the surface of the skin is made up of multiple layers. The bottom layer of the surface of the skin is called the basal layer. This is where the skin cells reside. The top layer of the surface of the skin is called the stratum corneum, or the hard layer. And nature has designed a process where skin cells are born at the basal layer, the bottom of the surface of the skin, and they rise to the top of the surface of the skin in a journey that is referred to as transit. Transit time when we're younger is around 4 to 6 weeks. When we're older, it slows down. As we get older and older, everything slows down. Some of you can relate. I certainly can relate to this. And one of the keys to having healthy skin is to speed up transit time. We can speed up transit time, as we said, by disturbing the surface of the skin, which sends signals down to the bottom that says, hey, shingles are missing from the roof. Let's get some more shingles up from the bottom. And this assures that no matter what's happening on the surface of the skin in terms of damage, that damage will always be repaired. In addition, this movement, this transit of cells from the bottom to the top, also stimulates another process, and that is the dumping out of contents overboard as those cells are rising from the bottom to the top, and a shape-shifting that's occurring with molecules inside those cells as the cell is transiting. So cells are transiting from the bottom to the top by virtue of disturbances on the surface of the skin. As they're moving from the bottom to the top, they're healing the wounds, if there's wounds, or they're healing the disturbances, and they're assuring a fresh supply of strong, healthy cells for the barrier, the top of the skin. And they're also creating more of these molecules that are being shape-shifted inside the cell and more molecules that are being dumped overboard. Those molecules that are dumped overboard and that are shape-shifting inside the cells will come to rest in the skin surface, and they will function as moisture factors and as skin fats that trap moisture. So by disturbing the surface of the skin, you get more cells rising from the bottom to the top, healing the disturbances if they're cuts, or also strengthening the skin surface, the stratum corneum, plus you get more moisture factors and more skin fats, assuring that the skin stays hydrated and the barrier stays strong. This is a process that occurs anyway, as I said, but it slows down as we get older. By intentionally disturbing the surface, you can intentionally encourage the movement of cells from the bottom to the top, intentionally strengthening the barrier, and intentionally improving the skin's ability to hydrate itself. This intentional disturbance of the skin, a kind of controlled wounding, is called exfoliation, meaning to remove leaves, referring to the fact that you're disturbing or removing the surface cells, encouraging the movement of new cells to patch up the hole, so to speak, to repair the roof. I think of shingles on a roof. Hey, shingles are missing on the roof. Let's get more shingles up is kind of what the surface is telling the bottom. And you get more moisture factors and more lipids. So learning to exfoliate the skin is an incredibly important thing to do if you want to have a healthy skin barrier and if you want to keep your skin soft and hydrated. I like to think of exfoliation as exercising the skin, taking the skin to the gym, because the same thing happens when you exercise. You lift weights, you disturb your muscle fibers, the muscle fibers send signals to the muscle fiber cells. Hey, let's get some more cells or more fibers going. And this is how you get bigger and stronger when you lift weights. So if you understand how important it is to exfoliate, and hopefully you do, based on what we just said, now it comes to how do you exfoliate? Well, there's lots of ways you can exfoliate the skin. You can use a washcloth to exfoliate the skin. Just simply washing your skin with a washcloth will create disturbances on the skin surface, and this will encourage the movement of new cells and encourage new moisture factors and new skin lipids as well. So washcloth can do it. You can do it, men do it when they shave. You can do it with a razor. You can do it with shooting little crystals at the skin in a process called microdermabrasion that you can have done at a doctor's office or by an esthetician. You can use enzymes to disturb the surface of the skin. There's lots of different ways to disturb the surface of the skin, i.e. to exfoliate the skin, to control wound the skin, to exercise the skin, whatever metaphor or whatever descriptor you want to use to talk about that process. But my favorite way to exfoliate the skin is to use an ingredient topically called alpha hydroxy acids. Alpha hydroxy acids are a group of molecules that are found all over nature. In fact, every single cell that's alive makes alpha hydroxy acids. Every cell in your body makes alpha hydroxy acids. Every cell in your skin makes alpha hydroxy acids. Every cell in a plant, every cell in an ant, every cell in a monkey, every cell in any animal or any living organism is making alpha hydroxy acids. Alpha hydroxy acids are a fundamental family of molecules that are found throughout nature. And the fact that these are so fundamental, in fact, they're fundamental to the life process itself, accounts for their incredible mildness and gentleness. We eat alpha hydroxy acids every time we bite into an apple. We drink alpha hydroxy acids every time we drink wine or we drink orange juice or we drink a glass of milk. Alpha hydroxy acids are part of our body. We're ingesting alpha hydroxy acids all the time. But when you put them on top of your skin specifically, some very interesting things happen. First of all, alpha hydroxy acids have an ability to dissolve the glue that holds dead skin cells in place. Now remember, we're talking about controlled wounding. We're talking about disturbing the surface of the skin so that we can turn on the movement, the transit of cells from the bottom to the top. Alpha hydroxy acids, by virtue of their ability to loosen the glue that holds dead skin cells in place on the surface, allows them to flop off, and this flopping off initiates signals that say, hey, shingles are missing from the roof. Let's get some more shingles up on the surface and turn it on this transit, this movement of cells from the bottom to the top. They have an ability to disturb the surface of the skin cells on the surface, initiating movement from the bottom to the top. But alpha hydroxy acids do a second thing. They lower the pH of the skin. So real quickly about pH. You all heard the term pH, but maybe we'll talk about a little bit what it means. pH is a measurement of how acid something is or how non-acid it is. The pH scale goes from 0 to 14, where 0 is very, very acid and 14 is very, very non-acid. Some people say alkaline, some people will say base. So you've got a pH scale that goes from 0, very acid, to 14, very, very alkaline, or a very, very non-acid, we'll say. The skin, or before we say the skin, water is considered neutral. That's about 7. The skin is said to be slightly acidic. So skin is right around pH of 4.5 to 5.0, somewhere 4.5 to 6.0, somewhere in there. It kind of fluctuates a little bit. And by the way, guess what it is that maintains the acid level of the skin, at least partially? Alpha hydroxy acids. So alpha hydroxy acids are a normal constituent of the skin itself as well as of skin cells. This is why they're so fantastic, is because they've got these benefits, but they're native to the skin. So when you put them on the skin, it's not like you're putting something strange on the skin. So anyway, you put your alpha hydroxy acids on the skin. They have an ability to loosen the cells that are on the surface. The cells in turn flop off, and that in turn initiates transit, movement of cells from the bottom to the top. As we get older, transit time slows down. So this is a way that you can reverse the aging process, at least in terms of transit time, by speeding up the movement of cells from the bottom to the top. So instead of 8 weeks, it's now 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks. Instead of having a transit of an older person, now you have the transit of a younger person. But the pH is also important because by dropping the pH, alpha hydroxy acids are acidic and the pH of the skin is slightly acidic. So by dropping the pH of the skin, say your skin has a pH of 4.5, when you put an alpha hydroxy acid on the skin that has a pH of 3, which is 1.5 points lower than the pH of the skin naturally, now you've created more stimulation. Acid, as it turns out, stimulates. This is really important because a lot of us are under the impression that acid is a bad thing. Inside the body, sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, you got to have your blood be alkaline, your blood's too acidic. There's a book that came out in the 1990s that got a lot of publicity called Alkalinize or Die. I don't know if it came out in the 1990s, but it was popular in the 1990s, called Alkalinize or Die, and it talked about how you got to eat alkaline. You've heard of alkaline water, and people are always talking about how alkalinity or keeping the fluids of the body or alkaline are important. And so we have this kind of negative opinion culturally of acids. Acid is associated with stress. Acid is associated with diseases. Acidic blood is associated with poor health. But as it turns out, acid also stimulates growth. In fact, alpha hydroxy acids can be thought of almost like a growth hormone in terms of their ability to stimulate growth. A classic example of acid's ability to stimulate growth is when you work out. If you're lifting weights, you'll get bigger just by virtue of tearing the muscles. We talked about that on our last podcast. We talked about how tearing up the muscles initiates the growth of more muscle fibers from the muscle fiber cells, the myocytes, and you get stronger muscles. That's why you lift weights. That's why you exercise. You get bigger muscles. Well, it turns out that if you want to get really big muscles, if you want to be really strong, you don't just lift weights. You lift weights until you feel the burn, right? What is that burn? That burn is acid. You dropped the pH of the muscle. You've dropped the pH of the fluids surrounding the muscle. And now you've got a second mechanism that stimulates the growth of muscle. Yes, just disturbing the muscle fibers will initiate growth. But if you want to get really big, you want a second mechanism, and that's dropping the pH of the muscle. Well, guess what? The same thing happens on the skin. And it turns out that when you use an acid like an alpha hydroxy acid on the surface of the skin, not only will you disturb the skin surface, the cells on the skin surface, causing them to flop off, sending signals to the bottom, say, hey, shingles are missing from the roof. Let's get some more cells from the bottom to the top. But now you've got a second mechanism. You've dropped the pH. You've made the skin more acidic, and because acid stimulates growth, now you get even more growth and movement of cells from the bottom to the top, which of course means a stronger barrier, and it also means more moisture factors and more lipids to keep the skin hydrated. So alpha hydroxy acids give you two mechanisms of action for turning on the movement of cells from the bottom to the top. You can shave to exfoliate. You can use a washcloth to exfoliate. You can have microdermabrasion processes at an esthetician or doctor's office to exfoliate. But when you use alpha hydroxy acids on the skin to exfoliate, you get two mechanisms, not just disturbing the surface, you also drop the pH and make the skin more acidic, and acid is associated with growth. Now, you may say, well, why can't I use battery acid or sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid? Well, you could, but the problem with those really, really strong acids is you're going to induce a burn and cause damage. So when you're exercising, you want to exercise in a controlled fashion. Yeah, you want to disturb your muscles, but you don't want to majorly damage your muscles when you're exercising. Likewise, when you're exfoliating the skin, you want to disturb the skin surface, but you don't want to create major damage on the skin surface. So you need acid, but you don't want too much acid. Or you need to exfoliate, but you don't want too much exfoliation. There's kind of a sweet spot. And it turns out that alpha hydroxy acids naturally have that sweet spot. Alpha hydroxy acids typically are going to have a pH, depending on the concentration and depending on how diluted they are, somewhere around 2 or 3. I like to have a pH in my alpha hydroxy acid solutions that I use for patients to take home, somewhere around 3. If I'm making an alpha hydroxy acid peel for use in a salon, I like the pH to be around 2 or even 1.5 to 2. Now, alpha hydroxy acids come in various forms really. The most popular form is known as glycolic acid, and that's pretty much your go-to alpha hydroxy acid. That's the one that has the most research associated with it, and that's the one that most products will contain, most alpha hydroxy acid products will contain. They'll typically be in a take-home product that you buy in a store, somewhere between 1 and 5%. When I'm formulating alpha hydroxy acid products, I'm going for higher pHs, usually between 5, or higher concentrations, between 5 and 10%. I like my pHs to be around 3. A typical store product will be a higher pH and less effective because it's a higher pH, typically around 4 or 5. So you want to look for for maximum effects, you want to look for alpha hydroxy acids that have a pH of around 3-ish or so and have a concentration of between 5 and 10%. If you're an esthetician or you're a professional, you're going to go lower in pH and you're going to go higher in concentration. So glycolic acid is the most commonly used alpha hydroxy acid. Another alpha hydroxy acid that's not quite as commonly used as glycolic acid is called lactic acid. Now, lactic acid has a bigger molecule is a bigger molecule than glycolic acid. So it tends to sit on the surface of the skin, and it also tends to attract moisture more effectively. So you'll find lactic acid in products that are designed for more sensitive skin types, or also for skin types that are drier. When I'm formulating a lactic acid product, I'm typically going to formulate it between 5 and 15%, and I'll keep the pH again right around 3.0. I like lactic acid because it's a bigger molecule, so it doesn't penetrate as deeply, so it's more appropriate for sensitive skin, and also it hydrates the skin more effectively. But for anti-aging purposes, if you're looking for more anti-aging purposes for your alpha hydroxy acid products, you're going to want glycolic acid. And by the way, glycolic acid will also trap some water. Glycolic acid is not that far off from lactic acid in its chemical structure that it would not have some water trapping properties. Water trapping in biochemistry is called hygroscopicity or hygroscopic. A hygroscopic molecule is a molecule that traps water. Glycolic acid is still hygroscopic, even though not as much as lactic acid. Another hydroxy acid is not quite an alpha hydroxy acid, and that's called salicylic acid. And that's more appropriate for people who have oily skin or people who have acne. Salicylic acid is very antibacterial, so it'll kill acne bacteria, and also it dissolves the glue that's holding dead skin cells in place more effectively than glycolic acid or lactic acid. In fact, you'll find salicylic acid in wart products or in nail products, particularly for nail fungus, toenail fungus, because salicylic acid really dissolves keratin very effectively. We call salicylic acid a keratinolytic. And by virtue of its ability to dissolve keratin, that makes it appropriate for people who have plugs, like acne patients who will have keratin plugs inside their skin in the pores of their skin. It also makes it appropriate for breaking through pimples. And also it has more antibacterial effects than lactic acid and glycolic acid, although both of those will also have some antibacterial properties. Salicylic acid is even more antibacterial. So salicylic acid has got the same kind of stimulating effects that your alpha hydroxy acids, glycolic acid and lactic acid have, but it has more antibacterial properties, and it dissolves keratin a little bit more effectively, making it more appropriate for acne patients, for patients who have pimples and blemishes, or who have clogged pores. And then there's another interesting alpha hydroxy acid that's kind of a cross between salicylic acid and glycolic and lactic acids, and that's called mandelic acid. Recently, I've become very fond of mandelic acid because you get the benefits of salicylic acid. Mandelic acid can dissolve keratin, kind of like salicylic, not as intensely as salicylic, but along the same lines. And it also has the stimulating effects that glycolic acid and lactic acid have. So it's kind of a cross between lactic acid and glycolic acid and salicylic acid, and that's called mandelic acid. There's a bunch of other alpha hydroxy acids. You've got adipic acid and formic acid and malic acid. There's a whole bunch of them found in nature, but your major ones in the skincare world anyway are lactic acid and glycolic acid and mandelic acid, and then salicylic acid, which is slightly different. In fact, technically salicylic acid is called a beta hydroxy acid, even though it functions similarly to the alpha hydroxy acids, glycolic and lactic and mandelic. So you've got lots of ways to exfoliate. Exfoliating is taking your skin to the gym, exercising your skin, the same benefits that you get when you exercise to get bigger muscles happen on the skin. You get bigger skin when you exercise the skin, just like you get bigger muscles when you exercise the muscles. Exfoliation is like exercising your skin. Lots of ways to do this. You can do it with a washcloth. You can do it with a loofah pad. You can do it when you shave, if you're a guy. And you can do it with microdermabrasion, and you can do it with dermaplaning, which is where they take a little device and they kind of scrape the surface of the skin. But the best way to exfoliate the skin, the best way to exercise the skin, the best way to turn on the production of cells from the bottom to the top to speed up transit time, reverse the aging process, improve the dumping out of contents that will become lipid and the shape-shifting of cells, of molecules inside of cells that will become the natural moisture factor to create a more hydrated skin, a stronger barrier. The absolute best way to do it is using alpha hydroxy acids, natural acids that are found all over nature. because you get two mechanisms of action. You get the exercise effect, disturbing the cells of the surface, which is analogous to disturbing the muscles when you lift weights, disturbing the muscle cells when you lift weights in order to get bigger, stronger muscles, disturbing the skin cells to get bigger, stronger skin. But you get a second mechanism of action, and that's the lowering of the pH, the increasing of the acid level of the skin. Acid itself is associated with growth. You can think of acid, specifically alpha hydroxy acids, as a growth-inducing factor, almost like a growth factor that turns on the growth of cells, the same way that when you lift weights. You'll get stronger when you disturb your muscles by doing your curls, but if you feel the burn, you get even stronger muscles. Likewise with the skin. If you disturb the surface of the skin, you'll get stronger skin and better skin and more hydrated skin. And if you drop the pH as well, you're also going to stimulate or enhance that movement of that transit time from the bottom to the top. And by the way, we're going to talk about this on our next podcast. It's not just the surface of the skin that benefits. It's not just the stratum corneum that benefits by exfoliation. It's not just the hydration and the water trapping property of the skin that is improved when you exfoliate the skin, when you take your skin to the gym, when you exercise the skin. It's also wrinkles and fine lines that will improve because you're not only working on the surface of the skin when you exfoliate, i.e. exercise, you're also working at the bottom layer, which is where most of your skin resides. We'll talk about that on our next Skin Matters podcast. I am pharmacist Benjamin Knight Fuchs, cosmetic chemist and nutritionist. Thanks for listening to Skin Matters. We'll talk to you on our next episode.